thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we do have an important announcement to make today, and I'm really pleased to announce that this morning my team, along with a coalition of 40 different plaintiffs, more about them in a moment, my team is filing a lawsuit in federal court in the Western District of Washington. So it's being filed here in Seattle. And the lawsuit is being filed in order to save the National Archives, which really, as you all know, constitutes the DNA of our region here in the Pacific Northwest. Over the last year, as many of you have seen and has been reported, the federal government has engaged in an accelerated process to try to sell the National Archives building and, importantly, move the archives that are housed there that are unique to the Pacific Northwest more than 1,000 miles away. These are documents that are not digitized, and moving them 1,000 miles away essentially and effectively eliminates public access to these critical documents. Look, I'll just say that the process, if you can even call it that, leading up to this decision has been, has really constituted hiding the ball from my team and the individuals, organizations who are on this call, ignoring the law and the procedures that must be followed before one can engage in an accelerated sale like this, and simply seemingly being uninterested in hearing from our region and our communities and the people who will be impacted by this truly outrageous decision. So our goal in this lawsuit is straightforward. It is to block the sale of this facility and to keep those records here in the Pacific Northwest. We have put together just a tremendous coalition of plaintiffs. I'm just so, we're just honored to partner with so many folks. Brianna did mention in the beginning that one of our speakers, President Sharp, does have a hard stop here before too long. So maybe towards the end, I'll read through the names of all 40 plaintiffs. It is a long list, but I do want to recognize them. They are listed in our press release. But just to give a sense at a high level, these are 29 federally recognized tribes, Alaskan tribal entities, and tribal communities from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, as well as 9 community organizations, historic preservation societies and museums, and also the state of Oregon, led by my colleague, Ellen Rosenblum. Every one of these organizations will be harmed if this sale is allowed to go forward. As I mentioned before, I may go through at the end and read through the names of all the plaintiffs, but it's just been, for the last several weeks in particular, just really appreciate the partnership over many Zoom meetings with the leaders of these organizations and those organizations to put together this lawsuit. I now want to introduce a few folks. First, the folks you'll be hearing from, the speakers, and then I'll introduce a few folks from my team. I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. So after I speak, we're going to turn this over to 4 speakers. Those speakers, the order you'll be seeing them and hearing them: Chairman Jeremy Sullivan of the Port Gamble S'Klallam Tribe, President Vaughn Sharp, who Brianna mentioned earlier, of the Quinault Indian Nation. She really wears 2 hats. She's also the president of the National Congress of American Indians. So she has a prominent role nationally as well on tribal issues. After President Sharp, we'll hear from Chairman Robert de Los Angeles of the Snoqualmie Tribe. And after the chairman, we'll hear from Connie So, president of the OCA Asian Pacific Advocates, Greater Seattle chapter. I do want to mention that while most of us have been enjoying the holidays, my complex litigation team is working extremely hard, putting together this lawsuit, preparing a motion for injunctive relief, pulling together all the declarations from the many different plaintiffs who are part of this. That team includes Lauren Frost, Kristen Vineski. By the way, Lauren and Kristen are 2 individuals from my team who, if there are questions about the legal side, you may be hearing from them. I may defer to them to answer questions. Nathan Bays, Brian Sutherland, Spencer Coates, Jessica Madeley, Grace Summers, and Jacob Gein are all part of the team that helped put this lawsuit together. So what I'm going to do now is to turn this over to Chairman Sullivan. Chairman Sullivan, you've been on board early on this case and have really been a leader in reaching out to other tribes across our region, and you've just been a partner in so many ways. And I just really appreciate you being a part of this. and look forward to your comments. Chairman, go right ahead.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to thank you and your team. You guys have been great and great to work with. And I want to thank my team of Gabe Galanda and Gina Steiner and Eric Eberhardt. We've been working with your team, and it's really been great to work with your team. The biggest problem we have is meaningful consultation never happened with the tribes about this sale of this building and our archives being moved. If any consultation would have happened, then they would have found out that the tribes really desire to have these materials close to us so we can have access to them, so we can verify the things that we've been told over the years. A lot of our historic documents are over in the archives, and they are verifying the very things that we've been talking about, that we've learned through oral histories. And having those archives there have really benefited a lot of the tribes in solidifying what we've been told over the years through generations. And having that be moved would be devastating to a lot of the tribes, or we just never really be able to verify the very things that we know in our hearts to be true, but the documents are in national archives. So I just, those are the very things that we're worried about. And I'm glad that people caught this. Some of the things I think that were detrimental was the lack of meaningful consultation, but also just getting notified that something like this is happening without having a conversation about it at all. Getting notified of a meeting from a news outlet rather than the federal government was pretty frustrating. And the lack of tribal leadership there, because there was no notification of these meetings. So all of these things were pretty frustrating for our team and for our tribe. And I'm glad that we're working with you with this lawsuit. So thanks to you and your team, Bob.
Thank you, Chairman. We really appreciate that. Of course, all of our speakers are available to help answer questions at the end of our comments as well. But thank you, Chairman, for that. And next, we're going to turn to President Vaughn Sharp. President Sharp, it's great to see you. Happy New Year. Thanks to you also for your leadership on this, and look forward to your comments. Thanks again, President.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. And I really want to thank you, Attorney General Ferguson, for taking this bold action. It's something that we've become accustomed to, knowing and understanding in some of the critical issues facing tribal nations at this time. You've been such a champion in understanding not only tribal sovereignty, but going back to last year in adopting free, prior, and informed consent, knowing that consultation with tribal nations is well beyond anything that should be just an exercise and checking the box for administrative action. In this case, we didn't even have consultation. And so you understand the gravity of not only having consultation, but any federal action that's proposed that is done without our consent is just as egregious and an affront to tribal sovereignty. So we know that your perspective on this issue goes well beyond simply an exercise of consultation, that sovereign tribal nations have an absolute right to weigh in and make a decision on critical things that affect our land, territory, resources, and people. So I just want to make that point, that this action really demonstrates your acknowledgement and recognition of basic human and civil rights afforded to tribal nations. These are standards that are beyond this country. They are international standards that every country globally understands and recognizes, these basic fundamental rights that tribal nations, issue after issue, case after case, we're confronted with a federal government in a partnership that is just an affront to sovereignty. So I just can't thank you enough for taking this action. And I want to speak just briefly to the meaning of all of the information that is housed here in the Great Pacific Northwest. The information that is housed in the history is vast, it's rich, it's timeless, and it's invaluable. We can't even put a price tag on the value of what those archives house for tribal nations. We have an incredible brain trust here in the Pacific Northwest, a rich and vibrant history, and this generation is witnessing our history come to life with the resurgence of our language, our cultures, our songs, our dance, tribal journeys. And we're just getting to a point of just having a basic understanding of this rich and vast history. And if this information were to ever leave the Pacific Northwest, it would be a loss not only to tribal nations, it would be a loss to the entire Pacific Northwest. And so we understand and recognize your leadership and understanding tribal sovereignty is an issue, the rich and valuable, timeless history that makes the Pacific Northwest so amazing, and the wisdom that is the foundation for all of us is just invaluable. So I cannot thank you enough, Attorney General Ferguson, and this is another issue for which we can look to you for leadership and partnership. And we just appreciate you so much for taking this issue on. And we stand in solidarity with you and all of our other partners to ensure that that information is kept here in the Great Pacific Northwest. It's part of all of us.
Thank you so much, President Sharp. And I will very, very briefly, maybe at the end of the remarks, discuss the legal parts of our case. But one of them is, to your point, President Sharp, the failure of the federal government to engage in meaningful consultation with tribes is a part of the legal case that we filed here today. Thank you so much, President Sharp. Next, we're going to hear from Chairman Robert de Los Angeles. Chairman. I think you're muted, Chairman.
Yeah, got to get used to that. Thank you again, Attorney General Ferguson, for allowing us to speak on behalf of the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. We appreciate your leading role in this lawsuit for the archives. The Seattle National Archives have played an integral role in preserving the history and legacy of the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. When our tribe had to fight for federal recognition for our rights and sovereignty, the Seattle Archives were a nearby resource that allowed us to conveniently access our own history and prove our case. It would be unconscionable to remove this valuable public institution and irreplaceable tribal history and records it contains from the constituents of the Pacific Northwest. We support Attorney General Ferguson's standing in this arbitrary and horrible decision. We appreciate you again for the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe, and I support you 100%. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for highlighting the importance of what's the documents there and what it means to your tribe and so many others. And then our fourth and final speaker is Connie So. Connie, thanks so much for your partnership on this case, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, I'm Connie So, president of the Greater Seattle chapter of OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates, a civil rights organization dedicated to serving the social, political, and economic well-being of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans. We proudly join Bob Ferguson and the Washington State Attorney General's lawsuit against the federal government to stop the sale of the National Archives facility in Seattle. The Archives public records directly connect current generations to the past. As a descendant of an 1850s Chinese gold prospector, I have firsthand knowledge of how the archives are critical partners in preserving our community's history. After facing tremendous hostility, most early Chinese Americans left few records of their lives and history prior to 1950. This makes the archives files related to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, all the more valuable. These documents include precious information about families, marriages, lifestyles, occupations, businesses, land ownership, religion, food, medicine, travels to and from China, networking organizations, and other information that would be otherwise lost. The National Archives facility is fundamental to our Asian Pacific American communities. Cutting access to these important historical records would be devastating. I would like to share two specific stories about the archives' importance. In my professional life, I am a teaching professor at the University of Washington's American Ethnic Studies Department. Back in 1996, when Seattle hosted the Association for Asian American Studies conference, we made a special trip with some of our conference attendees to the archives. Many people marveled at the fact that they could find information on relatives they thought were long lost. People shared poignant stories, especially when they discovered a photograph of a family member. More recently, the archives were vital to the Asian Pacific American community's collective ability to find information about Japanese, Filipino, and Chinese Americans who served in World War II. This information led to our successful campaigns to honor our veterans with the Congressional Gold Medal. OCA Greater Seattle proudly joins this lawsuit to ensure that generations of records continue to be available to our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. Thanks for sharing that personal perspective as well, which is such a good example. All these are of why I sometimes refer to this as the DNA of our region. The documents are housed at this facility. And just before we turn to your questions, we appreciate all the media outlets that are on. I guess just, you know, it's one thing I'll just will add is, you know, in my life, my late father, Murray Ferguson, he loved the archives. He was out there all the time. I'm not exactly sure, he's a father of 7. I'm not quite sure what he was doing out there, what he was researching, but he loved it. He was out there all the time. And he'd bring stuff back to the home. He took all of his kids out there at different times. He was on a first name basis with the people who worked there. You know, my sister jokes about the time she flew back from school back east, back in the days before cell phones and long distance phone calls were expensive. So you didn't talk that much, and you certainly didn't see her during the year. And she arrived at the airport after being gone for months, excited to get to the home. My dad picked her up and he said, we're going to stop at the archives on the way home. I need to pick something up. And so it sort of became a family joke. But in a serious way, it was important to him. And the research he did on our family genealogy and the issues that were important to him. And he's one of thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals, communities, tribes who go to that place to research things that are central to who they are and who we are as a region. And to me, it is so frustrating, and that's putting it kindly, it's so frustrating that, candidly, a bunch of federal bureaucrats 3,000 miles away are pushing this through without any consultation with tribes, without any public input, ignoring their own laws and processes for how to handle a sale like this. You know, I don't say this lightly, but, you know, I know, having been in politics a long time now, when someone is interested in solving a problem or in listening or trying to get to an outcome that works for everybody. I know when somebody wants to do that. I recognize that when I see it. I also know when someone just frankly doesn't give a damn and they're just going to do it their way, and they don't care who they've got to run over or what laws they need to break or what they need to do to get what they want. And this is most certainly the latter. This federal agency, these federal agencies just don't care. And they've had plenty of opportunities to work with us and the 40 different plaintiffs who are part of this lawsuit to reach an outcome that would work for everybody, but they're plainly just not interested. We've had to file lawsuits, for crying out loud, just to get public records. We've had to file freedom of information lawsuits, multiple lawsuits, just to get public records that we should be entitled to. It's exactly the kind of thing that drives people crazy about government. Government that doesn't listen, doesn't seem to care, doesn't want to find a solution. And so it's unfortunate we have to come to a lawsuit and put the resource into that. But that's where we're at. And so I want to do now, Brianna from my team, who you heard at the outset. Brianna, I know we've got a lot of media outlets on. If folks do have questions, we'd love to have a chance to answer them. And I can also briefly outline sort of the legal arguments as well, maybe a bit later. But Brianna, I want to turn over to you in case there are questions from anyone who's with the media.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, if anybody does have questions, please use the hand raising feature. Go ahead and send a chat message and I'll unmute you. So in addition to being muted on your end, we've got folks muted here, so I can unmute people who have a question if anybody'd like to raise their hand or send me a chat. Right now, Bob, I do not see any raised hands.
So Brianna, maybe I'll just briefly mention sort of the legal arguments and then see if folks have a question at that point. So just in very brief, the lawsuit I mentioned being filed in federal court today here in the Western District of Washington. Think of the case in 3 broad arguments. Number one, that what the federal government is doing is improper because there's a specific exemption for buildings like the National Archives from being put up for sale in this way when those facilities are used for research in connection with federal agricultural, recreational, or conservation programs. So if the facility is used in that way for that kind of a research, by law, it's exempted from going through the process that we're seeing with this facility. Keep in mind, the National Archives are part of about a dozen facilities around the country that have all been grouped together for a sale. So it's literally being lumped in with empty warehouses in Washington State and around the country. So we're saying there's a specific exemption under the law that says you cannot sell this property because of the research that's done there. Number two, in general, we're saying that the process, if you can call it that, that the federal agencies used for an accelerated sale, and that's what this is, that they needed to receive consultation, for example, from the Office of Management and Budget, and they did not do that. So in other words, there are specific processes that they need to follow before going through with an accelerated sale, and they did not do that. Third, and as you heard earlier from my exchange with President Sharp, that the federal government did not engage with consultation with tribal governments here in the Northwest, and that's another part of our claims against the federal government. So again, we're filing today. We'll be soon moving for what we call injunctive relief. This is something you'll be familiar with in many of our lawsuits that we file against the federal government, where we're asking a federal judge to put a stop to the sale of the National Archives, and we'll be doing that quickly. So unlike many cases that can take many months before you're before a judge, this is the kind of case where we would frankly expect to be in front of a judge making arguments literally in a matter of weeks rather than months. So Brianna, I'll stop there just in case folks did have any questions before we wrap up.
One moment. Looks like I've got a couple of folks in the chat. Find them.
And that is Finn. Folks are here in the background, by the way. So Finn's a regular on our calls. So it's always good to hear Finn.
Just trying to unmute Felix here. Sorry, Felix, I'm not getting an option. Let me try it one other way.
There you go. I can hear Felix now, by the way, Brian.
Oh, hey, one question I had. I get that shutting down the sale is important for just stopping everything and putting a pause on the whole process. Moving forward, though, with all this interest from the tribes and these different heritage organizations, how does this community that's been not necessarily created but identified by this threatened sale, how does that community move forward to prevent something like this from happening again in the future and ensuring those records have a long-term sustainable home here in the Northwest?
Felix, thanks for that question. I'll start, but then I really encourage our other guests here to weigh in as well. I think maybe you had sort of two parts to your question, Felix. One was, hey, how do we sort of stop this from happening again? If we're successful in stopping the sale, how do we stop this from happening again? And number two, hey, about the records long term, how do we make sure the records stay here kind of moving forward? I guess I'll take a quick shot at those and then encourage others to jump in. In terms of how to prevent this in the future, I guess one thing I just would say, Felix, is it's my experience that a good way to get someone's attention is you stop them in court. And hopefully, federal agencies would understand the lesson that they have to defend their conduct in court, and federal judges are going to make you follow the law. And if you don't, hopefully they'll take a lesson from that maybe next time they shouldn't just run over local communities and tribes when they want to take an action that impacts those individuals and organizations. Number two, on the sort of moving forward, if successful in stopping the sale short term, what about the records long term? I guess what I would say is it's sort of one step at a time. Right now, we need to stop the sale, which is moving forward at an expedited pace. But your question is an important one. We, as a group, and others as well, by the way, have had Zoom conversations that have touched on that issue of, hey, long term. So, for example, we're engaging with our congressional delegation, Felix, to make sure that they understand what's going on and are updating what's going on. And so I think you can expect that the organizations and tribes involved in this lawsuit will have those kinds of communications with congressional leaders as well in the federal agencies under the new administration that will soon be taking over to hopefully make sure they can find an ultimate resolution that keeps these records here in the Northwest where obviously they belong. President Sharp, it looks like you might have unmuted yourself, so I'm just going to call on you. Hopefully that's okay, but jump right on in if you've got something to add there.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. And I really appreciate that question, because when issues do come up like this, it's one thing to address it directly, but also to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. And I again want to acknowledge the leadership of our Attorney General on this issue of meaningful relationships with tribal nations, because this idea of free, prior, and informed consent that the Attorney General adopted here in the state of Washington is not only an international standard, it's a gold standard. That concept globally is an aspirational policy, but here in the state of Washington, it's enforceable. So this international basic human and civil right that the world recognizes is on the front line here in the state of Washington, and it's our goal to nationalize it. Our Attorney General has issued a letter to attorneys general across the country challenging them to adopt policies like this. And the basic example I use often is the Dakota Access Pipeline, the DAPL. In what country is it possible to, over the objection, without consultation, construct a pipeline through sacred sites and desecrating those? And right now, all across the country, there are examples of that. There's a wall that's being constructed at the border over the objection of tribal nations. And so we're hoping that the policies that we've adopted here in the state of Washington with the leadership of our Attorney General will continue to build momentum to nationalize and even globalize an international policy here in the state of Washington. So we are going to be aggressively pushing that with the next administration. And it's our belief that adopting that policy here in the state of Washington and populating it within every federal agency that we've come into contact with like this, it's a pointed example. And we believe that that's going to be an effort that will continue to provide security for tribal nations long into the future. But I just wanted to make that point that we are at the beginning of advancing a global standard. And this is another example where we're going to be able to partner with the state of Washington and our Attorney General to make this a very real and meaningful policy.
Thank you, President Sharp. Any of our other speakers want to add to that question? If not, hey, Brian, I'm not sure if Essex Porter wanted to ask a question. I did see him on screen there for a little bit, so I wasn't sure if he was trying to get your attention or not.
Yeah,
but,
Essex, go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm not able to unmute you in this screen, but you should be able to do it.
Okay, I've unmuted myself, hoping that you are hearing me.
yes.
Okay. My question, both for you, Mr. Attorney General, and for one of the participants, has there been any contact with the incoming Biden administration? Have they been asked to stop this sale when they get into office? And if there's been any contact, how have they responded?
Thanks for that, Essex. I guess I'll start and open up to any others if they want to add. I guess what I can say at this point, Essex, is we are, of course, primarily focused and extremely busy, as you might imagine, on getting this lawsuit filed and getting the motion for a preliminary injunction put in place. It's a huge body of work, to put it mildly. So we're very, very focused on that. That said, we have been starting the process of reaching out specifically to our congressional delegation. I've had direct conversations with members of our congressional delegation. My team has as well, and others on this call, and some of the plaintiffs have as well. So we're reaching out in that way. You know, with the new administration coming in, of course, we're trying to reach out there as well. You know, I think it's fair to say there's a lot on the plate for a new administration at this point. I'm hopeful that with the new administration, there'll be a change in priorities with these federal agencies and the way they're making their decisions. But right now, we need to put a stop to the sale. That's obviously the first priority. This sale is accelerating. They're bringing on someone to put that sale together. This property could be on the market literally in a matter of weeks. So we need to, first things first, put a stop to this right away to allow time for a new administration. Frankly, our congressional delegation sort to also help with the next steps of making sure this doesn't go through and the records stay here. With that, I'll open up to any of the other speakers, maybe if they want to add anything to that as well.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that question. The Biden administration has reached out quite actively to tribal nations. The transition team, we've had a number of excellent conversations around a wide range set of policies. So I want to make that acknowledgement that we've not had that in a long time, where we've had federal officials actually reach out to want to even talk to us about issues. So that's been a welcome. We've not specifically talked about this issue, but we have talked about consultation, meaningful consultation. At the National Congress of American Indians, we've adopted a transition plan that includes some of those key policies, as well as policies that directly relate to the archives. And so we anticipate that as the issues do emerge, and as we continue to work on this through a transitional period, that we'll have a very favorable response from a new administration on this issue.
Thanks, President Sharp. Brianna, anything on your end?
Yeah, Jean Johnson from the Associated Press. Jean, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks very much. I was wondering if you could give any update related to the FOIA requests and lawsuit, whether you've received any further documents from that, and if so, if you've learned anything.
Thanks for that question, Gene. I may defer in part to my team on that to give you a quick update. So, as you know, we have filed multiple Freedom of Information lawsuits to get these records. It's worth pointing out that one of these agencies told us that we'd have to pay, the taxpayers would have to pay, of Washington, have to pay over $60,000 so this federal agency could have the documents redacted. I'm not sure what the heck they need to redact from the sale of properties around the country. This isn't some national security issue, but they literally were saying we had to pay $65,000 to have these documents redacted. Needless to say, we rejected that, and I believe they've walked back from that request. But I'll turn to either Lauren or Kristen, maybe give a quick update on where we're at on the Freedom of Information lawsuit, and also I think we have started getting some documents, and maybe Lauren, you could chat to that.
Sure. The Attorney General is correct. We have begun receiving some documents over the last 2 months. The documents in general tend to be highly redacted, and we are still waiting to receive the vast majority of them. We moved for summary judgment with respect to the Public Buildings Reform Board, the PBRB, who made this decision last week, and asked the court to require them to immediately produce all of the responsive documents that they had previously identified, and asked for the $65,000 payment to redact them. In response to our request from the court, they asked the court to give them until March 31st of 2021 to produce all of their responsive documents. And we filed a brief opposing that last week on the 31st. And so that is now set for decision before the court.
Thanks for that, Lauren. By the way, just want to mention before turning back to you, Brown, it's, it's been months since we've asked for those documents, and they're public records. There are records. We're entitled to see those. And so when I say that these federal agencies are hiding the ball, this is an example of it. They're not even doing the basic level of just turning over the documents. And Lauren, sorry to put you on the spot again, but hopefully I'm remembering this correctly. But my recollection in what was sent back to us, when we say redacted, that means that literally what you see is a bunch of black lines over text in these documents. That's what redacted means. That someone just took a black marker and wrote over paragraphs, sentences, words, so we can't see them. They're saying they're privileged in some way and the public can't see those, which I'm skeptical of. But my recollection, Lauren, is that part of those were there were red flag objections to the sale of the National Archives. Do you mind just, hopefully I remember that correctly, and you can just elaborate on that a little bit as one example of these redactions we talk about how meaningful that they could potentially be.
Yes, that's correct. One of the documents we received from the Office of Management and Budget was an email that contained an attachment reflecting red flag objections to the sale of several properties, but one of those was the National Archives at Seattle. That attachment, however, was entirely withheld. So our plan is to coordinate with the government to see if we can get them to agree to release that to us. And if not, then explore options with the court to try and get that information.
And just put up maybe, I mean, there's a lot to be said about this, Gene, but one thing I'll say is it's clear that at least one of these agencies has the documents, right? They have them. They're saying, well, they've got to be redacted. We're saying, well, no, we're not going to pay for that. And they could turn them over to us. Just want to be clear about that. They could. They don't have to redact them. They're choosing not to do that. So we literally have to litigate this before a federal judge. I mean, it's just to put this in some perspective. So that's frustrating. And the idea that now they're saying we need till basically March 30th, 31st, April 1st to turn these over. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out by that point the sale of the property would potentially already be done by that point. In which case it would obviously be far too late to see what their thinking was, if any, around the sale of this property.
Okay, thank you. And you, that was another question I was hoping to ask is there any update to the potential sale? I mean, I know there was you were concerned that this was happening in an expedited fashion. Is there any further timeline that you're aware of?
I'll turn to Lauren on that. And by the way, I see Chairman Sullivan, you've unmuted yourself. I'm going to turn to you, see if you have something you want to add on this as well. But Lauren, is there anything you can add about any update on the sale, or maybe just at a high level, maybe just remind folks of what this accelerated sale now looks like? It's obviously upon us here pretty quickly.
So what we learned is on the Public Buildings Reform Board website, in which they indicate that they plan to bring the property to market by early 2021. So that is the latest information that we have on that, but that was provided by them. And along with a decision that was made by the Public Buildings Reform Board in consultation with OMB and GSA to, instead of selling each of these properties separately, the 12 identified properties separately, to bundle them all together and to move with as a consolidated sale of all 12 properties together. So upon learning that they were planning to sell all 12 properties together and bring them to market by early 2021, that was when we began working in earnest on this action. I would also add that the PBRB, the Public Buildings Reform Board, held a public meeting in October, and in that also discussed that they are currently hiring a broker. And our understanding was that that was supposed to be completed by either the end of December or early January.
So Gene, things are happening quickly. Just as a reminder, it's worth pointing out that despite having sort of the public outroar here about what was going on, despite the fact that we had Freedom of Information request lawsuits filed against them, Lauren mentioning these decisions to hire a broker, bundle all the properties together, get this going by January. Those decisions were made in a meeting without any discussion with any of the folks on this call or anybody else. So despite knowing of the intense interest of this sale, when they sort of changed how they're going about doing it, no one from these agencies thought, hey, maybe we should reach out to someone out in the Pacific Northwest and let them know that this is what our plans are. Again, hiding the ball. They're just not interested in sharing that with us. My team found that when they were doing some research online for something else, came across some 60 or 70 page document, and going through that, buried in that document, was this change in how they're going about the sale of this property. Chairman Sullivan, did you want to jump in as well there?
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out also, Bob, that we had to do a FOIA request to get information, and that's unusual for our tribe to. We're usually working with the federal government in consultation, and for us to have to do FOIA requests was unusual, and we did have to do that. And it just shows you that there was no consultation, and it's been a kind of a frustrating process for us too.
Thanks, Chairman. Brianna?
Gene, just to let you know, I can send you a link to those documents we've received so far, and if anybody else on the call would like that, go ahead and send me an email. I see Felix jumped in with another question, just real briefly, if anybody knows, maybe Kristen or Lauren, the red flag objections email, what was the date on that?
October 16th, 2019.
And so, Brianna, maybe we can, I understand that that is a redacted document, but perhaps Lauren and Brianna, you guys could get a copy of that to, I think so the question came from Felix. Sorry if I forgot that already, Brianna, but yeah, that'd be great. Great.
Jennifer, go ahead and unmute if you'd like to ask your question to the speakers.
Yeah, given that the archives were moved from Alaska to Washington State, are you guys in communication with any people in Alaska as you work on this?
Sure, so I'll start, Jennifer, others can jump in, and maybe Lauren, I know there's, let me say this, there's a lot of conversations with a lot of folks, so I've got one perspective on this, but my team's having conversations, others on this call as well. What I'll say just at a high level, Jennifer, is we've had a series of Zoom meetings with a large number of organizations and tribes from throughout Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, and that's reflected in the plaintiffs, as you see, which have communities and tribes from all those states as a part of the lawsuit formally. I think you'll also see potentially what's called an amicus brief potentially being filed. That's where someone doesn't join a lawsuit, but they file a brief with the court because they have an interest in what's going on. I can also say that the AG offices in all of those states are, of course, aware of what we're doing, and the state of Oregon has actually formally joined our lawsuit as well. Lauren, maybe I'll just turn to you or to Kristen if there's anything else you want to add in terms of communication specifically with Alaska, which has a unique harm in the way that Jennifer outlined.
And sorry, same question about the Idaho Attorney General's office has come up in the chat as well.
Lauren, anything you can add to well, I guess what I say, if it's the AG's office specifically, I guess I can say that those offices are aware of the lawsuit being filed. I mean, obviously we welcome any participation, whatever way is appropriate for any state. We appreciate the state of Oregon actually joined the lawsuit, which is a huge help. But just to be clear, all those states are definitely aware as state entities. I want to be clear, the state governments are all aware of what we're doing today, and we've reached out to them some time ago.
On Alaska, I would just add that, as the Attorney General indicated, there are 3 Alaska tribes and Native corporations that have joined as co-plaintiffs. We have also been in contact with the Alaska Historical Society and plan to present evidence from them to the court in conjunction with our motion for preliminary injunction.
Thanks, Lauren. And Essex had a follow-up question. Go ahead, Essex.
Yes, I would just like to ask those of you on the call to share a little more of your own personal connections to the archives and the information there, why it's so important for you in your hearts that this archive be retained here in the Seattle area.
Thanks for that question, Essex. Maybe I'll just go to, just so we don't speak over each other, maybe Connie, I'll go to you first, then maybe Chairman Solomon, Chairman de Los Angeles, to see if you want to add to the comments you already made. Connie, I know you spoke a bit about your personal connection, but you want to add to that question from Essex?
You know, actually, I'll talk about some of the other people, other organizations that I know want to get involved. It's just that it happened so quickly that many of them could not. As many of you know, reparations, city of Seattle people in Seattle had a lot to do with reparations for Japanese Americans. I know many people who fought for reparations for Japanese Americans consulted the archives because, again, like the old Chinese and the old Filipinos, Japanese American, especially prior to 1950, also have the records here. And again, people should not have to prove the loyalty to the United States. They shouldn't have to go back to the land holdings and everything else that I already talked about for the Chinese, but many Japanese Americans also were forced to do that. And again, it's good that it took many, much longer than they should have, but they were able to successfully get redress. And I also know that when it came to the veterans, and the last time we used it was for, I think, just a few weeks ago when the Chinese veterans finally got their congressional medals. A lot of people didn't know that their last names were spelled in many different manners. Like the last name Hui, H-U-I, people say Huey. Sometimes they put it H-U-I-E and all these other things. So I know personally, I even helped one of the people at the archives to let her know that Wei, W-A-I or W-E-I, it's also H-U-I. And there's a lot of these things. And then when you're doing this, you're going back to history of not just what happens to Chinese immigrants, but to so many other people whose records are lost. I mean, a lot of these, the reason why people can't find ancestral stories is the way that our federal government is also pretty indifferent about how you put people's names. And I know that as a Chinese American, a lot of times everyone's name is Ah-Sin. For my last name, So, I would be Ah-So. Ah is just what Cantonese people, myself being Cantonese, we say before a lot of things. So it would be a Bob or, whatever, right? And again, these are things that you're not only looking at the archives, it's a larger entrance into the whole history of what's happened to many other people. And from our own personal histories, you find about many others. So when Attorney General Bob was talking about his father going through, I can see because a lot of these records, they're not just my stories, it's many other people's stories. And if we're interested in people of the state, if we're interested in people in general, then I don't see why anyone would not be interested in the archives. And I know people talk about digitizing all these things. It's not the same as when you're actually feeling the record, as when you're actually having the presence right there. And also it's a whole overwhelming feeling that everyone else's lost records are here. They all have an ancestral story that goes along with it. And I'm talking about it more as an Asian American and than the other groups, but I know many other groups also have very important records here. And I'm hearing some of the other panelists and I'm thinking and reflecting on that too.
Thanks, Connie. Chairman de Los Angeles, do you want to add to that as well, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, my brother, Chief Andy D. Los Angeles, one of his jobs was to go ahead and go down to the archives, and he took many family members down there and searched the records for, as I said before, the Snoqualmie Indian tribe history, and to give him more information on that for his role in the tribe as chief of the tribe. And also my sister also was the secretary for the Snoqualmie Indian tribe years ago, and she was down there with my mother and my aunts. So there's a lot of history here that is very close by that we can go ahead and access. We can go ahead and go over. If there was anything that we missed, we can go back over it to make sure that there was a complete understanding of what our history was. So personally, these records mean a lot for us for being in this location. So here again, we don't support this sale, and hopefully we can go ahead and move forward with this lawsuit to go ahead and put this to an end. So hopefully that answers Mr. Porter's question a little more.
Thanks, Chairman. Chairman Sullivan?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I would say, as an example, our tribe recently had negotiations with the Navy. And in those negotiations, we talked about our presence on Indian Island and our presence in Port Townsend as Skalalan people. And that was really important research, and it verified all the things that we had talked about in oral history over the years. And when we approached the Navy about our presence there, it was because of just getting access to beaches and being able to practice our treaty rights. And that's one of our main concerns, is being able to, unfortunately we have to prove things. And one way we can prove them is by doing research at the archives and bringing that back home. And it just verifies the very thing that we had already learned through our oral histories. And when we talked about our presence on Indian Island and in Port, about ourselves also, we learned things about our families. We learned, how we were pushed off the Indian Island for the Navy to be able to take over on it. We were also pushed out of Port Townsend because a mill was going in there. So these things, while we knew that they happened, they were verified in the archives. And so I think those are just really shining examples of us being able to do research on ourselves and verifying the things that we had already known.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks to all of you for sharing those stories. I mean, I think the thread that runs through those is, yes, what's there is history, of course, ethics, but it's a living history, right? Those documents are telling stories, and those stories run through to today and tomorrow for the tribes, for the organizations, for folks who simply want to do some research there about their own individual family history and what it means for them. So it's an important place for a lot of people. Thanks for asking that, Essex. I know we've gone a little long, Brianna. Was there a final question someone had before we wrap up?
No, I don't see any more questions.
So let me just open up this. Any final words from any of our speakers before we wrap up? Just feel free to unmute yourself. I can see all three of you. So if you have any final thoughts, feel free to add something here before we wrap up. Any of our speakers? Chairman Sullivan, go right ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team, and thanks to all the people that are represented here. I raise my hands out of pure respect for you guys. I certainly hope we have success, and we're going to be right along with you the whole time. So thank you for all that work that you're doing.
Thank you, Chairman. And then just a final thought. This case will move quickly. Chairman De Los Angeles, you want to add something there?
Yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and echo Jeremy's statement. We support you 100%. As I said over again, if there's anything else that you need from the tribe, we're more than willingly to go ahead and step forward in this lawsuit, because it not only affects our tribe, it affects all tribes here in the Northwest, and plus the the ethnic, other ethnic organizations within the area also. You know, not only, you know, the Chinese, the Japanese, there's a huge rich history of unbelievable history here. I can't put it into words that this is a great time, great moment for.
Thank you, Chairman. One thing, I just have a final thought. Connie, go right ahead. Thank you. Go right ahead, Connie.
I'll just say, we brought this up to our national, we had an emergency meeting. We told them we wanted to join this lawsuit. And our national board also want to support this lawsuit. I know they didn't put their name forth, but I'm sure that for many of the local groups in the Seattle and other areas, affected areas, I'm sure everyone else, the word getting out, if they had more time, they would have joined it. So I'm sure there'll be hundreds of groups joining in. And I know our national group definitely supports it. And thank you for your efforts. And thank you for including us.
Thanks, Connie. That's one thing I did want to mention is we have a lot of experience, my team does, with bringing litigation against the federal government, and they're used to winning, by the way, as you all know. That this may be the broadest coalition. I guess I should have checked, but it's entirely possible this is literally the broadest coalition of any one of those cases. And it was put together in a matter of weeks. To Connie's point, others, you know, we did not think we'd have to be working on such an accelerated time frame, but the federal government changed their process, obviously. And so the fact that that many tribes and organizations have come together in such a short period of time is remarkable, but a testament to what this place and these documents mean to so many people, that in literally a matter of weeks over the holiday season, that many groups and boards could hold emergency meetings, to your point, Connie, and get the approvals they need from their boards and representatives to join a lawsuit against the federal government. So I just want to thank everybody for their help on this case. Thank my team again for their hard work, and to thank all of you for joining us on this Zoom media availability. We really appreciate your interest. Feel free to follow up for any questions you have with Brianna. Hope you all have a great day. Happy New Year, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks so much, everybody.